Whenever it comes to mushrooms growing, one terminology that is frequently used is the word pinning. If you're not completely familiar with how mushrooms grow and the development stages of a mushroom colony, let me explain to you a little bit what it means for a mushroom colony to start pinning. You can see this is a culture, actually a really neat looking culture, of a wild oyster sample that was harvested here in Pennsylvania less than a month ago. This is probably about 3 weeks old that I transferred the culture from that mushroom onto this agar. I think this is just, yeah, this is sweet potato flour and light malt extract agar in this little condiment cup, and I just put it in here. I just put it in here to see how well it would grow. And honestly, the whole thing colonized really, really quickly. Within like maybe 4 days, this whole thing was covered in mycelium. Let me put my lid back on here for now while I'm talking. I actually thought, since it colonized so quickly, that maybe it was a contamination, because typically mushrooms don't grow that fast. So I thought maybe this was some kind of mold that formed on the surface of this agar. So I just kept the cap on here, and I've just been letting this sit out on my workbench for about a week now, out here in the light and out here in the open air, not in the incubation chamber that I have for my culture plates and my petri dishes and test tubes and all that stuff. And I just wanted to see what would happen, because honestly, I eventually thought that it would just start putting off like little mold fruit bodies, and it would just turn like green or brown or yellow or whatever color that mold would be. I didn't really pay much attention to it until today, whenever I came out to check on my stuff out here, and I just happened to look over and I saw this in the middle of this little condiment cup here. I'm like, oh, holy crap, it is oysters. All right, sweet. So that's kind of why I wanted to start talking about these today, just because this was a really nice unexpected surprise to come out to see today. But yeah, one terminology that you hear quite often in like mycology videos or mycology literature, especially whenever you're getting to the point where you're trying to fruit out your cultures that you're growing on substrates or whatever, one of the terms that you frequently hear referenced is the word pin or pinning. As far as the word pinning goes, whenever we're talking about mushroom samples like this, all of mushroom pin really is just a really, really, really small, almost developed to the point where you can like tell that it's a complete mushroom, or else the start of a complete mushroom, but it's still very, very tiny. And that's really all a pin is. So let me put this underneath my microscope right here, and let's look at things a little magnified and just kind of talk about a little bit more in depth, because this is a really interesting little sample to look at. So you can see right here is the pin that I was just pointing to. This is just a really, really tiny, it just looks like a miniature mushroom, because essentially that's all it is. This is the point of the mushroom's reproductive cycle, where the mycelium has gotten to the stage where you can see that it is beginning to put off actual mushroom fruits, because this is what you would expect to see from a gilled capped mushroom, right? So that's really all a mushroom pin is it's a really distinguishable area of the mycelial growth that has comprised itself into such a way as to where you can determine that this is definitely in the stages of it becoming an actual full fruit body of the mushroom. But another terminology that you may have heard is the term primordia. Conveniently enough, right next to this pin is an area that you could probably, in a couple areas actually, that you could probably consider this to be primordia. A primordia is just basically the in-between stage of just a regular structure of my mushroom mycelium and a mushroom pin. And you can see that right here and these two structures, that this is definitely the primordial stage of mushroom fruit development, where the mycelium is starting to structure itself into the structure of a mushroom pin. Because right here you can see that the tips of these little primordial growths are starting to get a little darker, like you would expect the caps to get. They haven't gotten to the maturity level that this one has, where this part, which would ultimately become the stalk of the mushroom, is starting to also turn color. So I guess one of the best characteristics and distinguishing features you can say that will be able to determine whether you're looking at primordia or a mushroom pin is that primordia, you can see at the very tips of these very obvious areas of growth how they're starting to turn a little different color than the rest of the mycelium, but the part that would ultimately be the stalk still hasn't turned color. Just in case you were wondering, there you go. And down here's another nice example of primordial growth. Honestly, a lot of this this little culture plate, this culture cup, I guess you can call it, actually has a lot of nice features and a lot of nice places to look at for a lot of examples that we're going to be talking about here. But we're just focusing on these because this is a really nice concentrated area. Let's go to the big boy right here. This is the part of the culture that you would pretty much call, instead of a pin, you would just call this a small mushroom, because you can see it just looks like what you would expect a baby oyster mushroom to look like, although you can't really see because of the light, but that's fine. But yeah, like now we're getting into the territory where there's a very distinguishable area of the cap, which is right here, and then an even more distinguished area between the cap and the stalk. Obviously cap, oh, hold on, obviously the cap right up here, and then up here if it was this big, and then right here. And we're even beginning to see some gill development right here on the cap and on the stalk, because oyster mushrooms like these, the gills are decurrent, which means that they actually grow from the base of the stalk where it meets the cap and then swoops up onto the cap itself. Some mushrooms, their gills are detached, which means that the gills are only on the underside of the cap. Or some mushrooms have like partially connected, like there's a lot of terminology for gills on mushrooms, but we're not too worried about that in this video. We're just talking about this guy right here. But yeah, like this, I think that it's a safe bet to say that at this point you could just call this, instead of a pin, this is just a small mushroom, okay? Because we have all of the characteristics that we're looking for in an oyster mushroom fruit body, which is a distinct cap area, a gill area, and a stalk area. I like how this one even has like little oyster mushrooms coming off of the stalk of this oyster mushroom, which kind of gives you a good example and a good visual on how these oyster mushrooms grow from trees. That's why you usually do find oyster mushrooms like in big clumps. Like occasionally you do find them singularly, which is fine. But this one is a good example to show you why sometimes you will find oyster mushrooms and a lot of other like mushrooms that grow similarly to these. You'll find them in a really dense cluster that just kind of seems to stem from one common area. It's because often they grow like this. And all these little areas of growth that are on the stalk of this small mushroom right here and right here, you can see that we could probably technically call these small mushrooms as well, because it's not focused all that great. Hold on, let me see if I can focus a little better. Whatever. But yeah, you can see that even on these guys, at least on this one, we can't really see the underside too great on that one. But yeah, you see the cap right here, which is the obvious dark part. And then you can see at least the pattern that you would expect to observe for gills on an oyster mushroom. So I guess at the very least you could call this one as well a small mushroom. But then going over to, let me see if I can turn this a little bit so I can make this the highlight. Going to this guy right there, there is no real determinable area of gill development, but we do have like that distinct color differential right here on the cap area that will eventually become the cap if this is left to its own accord and to grow out to the point where it becomes a full-grown mushroom. And even right here, where same can go for the stalk, it's like to the point where this is definitely going to be an area of stalk development. Both of these areas are starting to become a little bit differently colored from the rest of the white mushroom mycelium. Oyster mushrooms, at least most oyster mushrooms in this genus, like the Pleurotus species, like oyster mushrooms, most of their mycelium color is white, like pure white. And there's a couple exceptions like pink oyster mushrooms and things like that, but most of the time you're dealing with a completely white mushroom culture until they start to put off fruits. So yeah, this I would definitely call this a pin right here, just because we're starting to get definite distinctive differences between the cap and the rest of the mycelial mass. Let me go back up to our little small tiny mushroom up here, which is the biggest mushroom on here, but you know what I'm saying, because I wanted to show a couple things before I end the video. This is a good visual if you ever wondered how mushrooms actually develop from these like random, well, seemingly random masses of mycelial growth. You know, like whenever you look at mushroom mycelium underneath a microscope, or even if you're watching it grow on petri dishes, you know, macroscopically, all they are a bunch of, you know, like thread-like filaments that just kind of grow amongst one another and kind of bunch up and stuff like that. But this is a good visual to show you that you can see right here in this area of this largish, relatively speaking, like mushroom fruit body that's forming. You can see that the fleshy bodies that we eat of mushroom colonies are just very concentrated and very well developed areas of the mushroom mycelium that grows together in these tight clusters, because you can still see in this stage of growth that you can't really see all that great over here because of the lighting, but this area right here you could definitely see all of the individual hyphae and all of the individual strands of mycelium that are coming together and bunching up together to form these dense bodies of, well, these dense fruit bodies. Well, dense areas of growth for the fruit bodies. So yeah, every single part, the cap, the gills, the stalk, veils, whatever, of the mushroom fruit body, they're all just mycelium. They're just arranged in a way to develop into the areas that they need for that fruit body to continue, well, for that fruit body to develop the way it needs to develop. So some of the mycelium will go and put energy into developing the gills, which will then start to develop spores for reproduction. Others will go into the cap, which will give it that characteristic look that you would expect to find with certain mushroom species, or that particular mushroom species that originated from that mushroom culture. And then same goes for the cap. You know, some of them will specialize to grow into the specialized area of the of the stalk here, and some of them will continue to grow for like a veil or a universal veil, even if you're like an amanita or something. So yeah, that's just really, really cool to me how mushrooms are just like, they're so simple. At least in principle, they look so simple, yet they're actually a really, really complex organism that has been here for forever, it seems like. So even though mushrooms may seem simple and kind of benign, and they may seem like they're kind of just here, honestly, mushrooms are really complex as far as like their morphology and just their biology, the way that they go about existing the way they do. They're just really, really, they know what they're doing. Mushrooms have been here for longer than plants have, and there's a reason for that. Well, at least fungi have been here longer than plants have. And there's quite a few reasons for that, because these guys know exactly what they need to do in order to survive. I just saw this out here. I'm like, I gotta make a quick video on this because this is so cool looking. So there you go. If you ever wonder the difference between like a mushroom fruit and a mushroom pin, or even like mushroom primordia, hopefully this video helped you clarify that a little bit. But look at that guy. Definitely a little mushroom pin. So cute. Bye-bye.